This is Sex and Science Hour with Brian Sovereign and Dr. Stephanie Murphy. Get your freak on.
Hello, and welcome to Sex and Science Hour. I'm Stephanie, you're Brian. Hello.
Of course, hello.
This is our third episode, and we thank you so much for joining us. Brian, everybody's talking about being doxxed.
Oh, boy.
I don't know if I want to talk about doxxed, because it's kind of sad, but our first segment is kind of full of depressing bad news, so I think we might as well at least give it a mention. But, so if you haven't heard, there's been some stuff going on this week, huh?
Some stuff.
Yeah.
Yes,
I just try to remember that we're on the radio, so
yeah.
to keep myself clean here.
That's putting it mildly. Well, it's a tough subject to keep clean about, because it's such a mess.
People lost fortunes.
Yeah.
And this is Mt. Gox, of course, the fail of a Bitcoin exchange that is on everyone's mind. It was, at one time it was served its purpose. It was the first real Bitcoin exchange. I remember friends of ours going on there and buying Bitcoins for less than $1.
Oh, sure. No, it really led the charge. It offered a tremendous service.
But it's been just like a dinosaur that's after the meteor strike that can't find any food. That was a bad analogy, but just languishing and just dying and screaming a slow, painful death.
Yeah, but this is the part that's still confusing me. Is that it seemed so obvious, in New Hampshire, we have a lot of Bitcoin, activists here, or people positive about Bitcoin, and no one here was trusting Gox. No one, and I'm talking about people, I'm talking about numbering at least over 1,000 people. Nobody was trusting Gox. Who was trusting Gox?
I don't know if it was the Bitcoin newbies, maybe, or if it was people.
It wasn't just the newbies.
Yeah, everybody, as I learned this week, everybody is susceptible sometimes to believing stuff that isn't really true, even if they think they're very rational and they've got a firm grip on reality. Sometimes people get fooled, and there were people who kind of believed what they wanted to believe and had money in Mt. Gox and lost fortunes. Maybe they were trying to do arbitrage or something like that, but...
Yeah, there's other ways, there's other places, to do that sort of thing.
I agree.
I have a hard time believing, that these people fell for this. It's been obvious for years now.
Well, yeah, it's not like a classic scam, like, hey, give me your money and I'll give you a 6% per month return.
Right.
That kind of thing. It was more like, we are an exchange and you can choose to keep money in or out of the exchange. But at any moment, this exchange may fail, or it may be revealed that they're insolvent and broken and you won't be able to get your money out. And for months, nobody could withdraw U.S. dollars ever since the U.S. government kind of got a hold of them and their bank accounts were seized in the U.S. But you could get Bitcoins out, and then they suspended Bitcoin withdrawals. And the rest is kind of history. You've probably heard about it, but apparently there was a document that got circulated around the internet. There was a little bit of a period where people were unsure if it was real. And then it was essentially came out that, this probably was real internal documents saying that Gox lost almost 750,000 Bitcoins.
Right.
But the thing is, the numbers don't add up. They were saying that there was a leak in their system, and the language was very weird, the way that they worded it. They said there was the cold storage was drained due to a leak in the hot wallet. And it's like, what? What do they mean by that? Cold storage was somehow connected to their hot wallet, and they were losing Bitcoins from their hot wallet. And not only that, but they would have had to lose something like 400 Bitcoins every day or something like that. And that's a huge amount that they wouldn't have been able to reconcile on their books. So just none of it really makes sense. I just wish Gox would go away. The unfortunate thing is there are going to be people asking for a bailout, asking for Gox to get bailed out.
Sure, but you know what? I think that was already happening, and this scares me a little bit, I'll admit, is I think that there are some big names in the Bitcoin community that thought Gox was too big to fail. And
we're going to give them a bailout?
And either give them a bailout, or they were going to let the lie go on as long as possible. And I am very disconcerted by that. Bitcoin's fine. That's the end game of all this, is that Bitcoin is, 1,000 times bigger than Gox. Okay.
Yes.
And the price is already on its way back up. There's no problem there.
Yeah. I mean, despite the mainstream media reporting that this is the end of Bitcoin, because some of they equate GOX with Bitcoin, the price has gone up. I mean, people are just saying, "Whoa, Bitcoins are on sale. Let's buy some."
Sure, but I mean, I feel like, to quote the Joker in Batman, hubba, 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 who do you trust? I don't know exactly what name to trust, because I can't believe, I have such a hard time believing this could go on. Unless somebody's going to tell me some government was involved with GOX, which there's no proof of that whatsoever. This is all being done independently. I think independently people were supporting.
Well, who knows who allegedly stole these coins?
Sure.
It could have been an inside job. I hate to use that phrase.
Oh, sure.
At GOX, somebody stole them internally.
Sure.
It could have been a government and exploiting some vulnerability. It could be somebody blackmailing somebody. Who knows? I mean, this is like wacky stuff, that you see in movies, but it's happening in real life. So we don't have any real answers at this point in time. We're just kind of talking about it, commenting on it. It's the Wild West out there. Be careful and don't look to government regulators to save you. They're not going to save you. They're not your friend.
No, there's no regulation right now going on, and Bitcoin's already back on the rise. Mm-hmm. Bitcoin's fine. This if anything, this whole situation that's being spun as a negative is an absolute positive, saying that Bitcoin is as strong an idea and a technology as it could be right now. So, yeah, nothing to worry about.
There we go. And so we got to at least give a little boo to Mount Gox.
Yeah.
But then a cheer for Bitcoin.
Right
on. Anyway, more bad news, Brian. 28% of Americans have not read a book in the past year.
Oh. Well, actually, I suppose you got to wonder, okay, sure, 28% of Americans haven't read a book, but then how many Americans can actually read in our school systems, that come out of our school systems? I mean, it's so bad.
That's a good question.
Yeah, but this brings, for me, this fact, obviously as sad as it sounds, for myself, something this kind of reminds me of is that you've got a lot of these crazy things going on, like with GOX or some new technologies coming out, like Ethereum or BitShares. And I get a little worried because I see the language they use, or I see what's going on, and I get a little scared because I don't feel there's an understanding of history. Okay. You take something like ProtoShares, and ProtoShares originally was based on like the 3 laws of robotics. And I'm worried about that, because if you know where the 3 laws of robotics come from, it comes from Isaac Asimov's book, I, Robot. Well, I, Robot was all about because those rules were meant to keep humans alive, so that humans could never die by a robot's hands. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? In the book, I, Robot, it's all about how robots could still logically kill human beings while following those 3 laws. Mm. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that, that ProtoShares are bringing on the apocalypse. I'm not saying that at all. Okay. But some of these other ideas that advocate for extreme transparency, like Ethereum, makes me think of another science fiction book, is The Demolished Man by Alfred Bester, which is all about a futuristic human society where everybody's a telepath and a murder occurs. Okay, so let's take that let's take that transparency to its extreme. Okay, where everything that's going on. A murder was still logically capable of happening. Okay, and so to put like extreme trust in these ideas, no, people gotta answer some serious questions that have already been explored 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago. But I think this is accurate. 20% of Americans don't read. I don't think they read.
Well, that's a great point, because we can learn a lot from sci-fi and we can learn a lot from literature. And It's true, people don't read anymore. I mean, why do you think that is? Is it because school beats the love of reading out of us?
Definitely.
Personally, I feel that was what happened with me. I loved to read. I was such a voracious reader up until the time I was about 11 or 12. And then I started being forced to read books in school, and it was just all downhill from there. That's what it felt like. Yeah. In school. And, you had to read these boring, horrible books that I didn't want to read. And then you had to write a book report about it. And it was just horrible.
Yeah, it was bad.
And then I didn't want to read anymore, and I didn't want to read for pleasure. And, eventually I kind of got some of it back. But it really just made a fun activity into homework. And that was not good.
Sure. No, I agree. I think that's a huge part of it. I also, because it's certainly not the stories, because people will go and see the movies of these things as much as the movies butcher books. Generally.
What is it with that? I mean, okay, maybe I'm old fashioned, but I like listening to audio and I like reading now. Again, I kind of reclaimed the love of reading.
Sure.
But, like when you read a book or when you listen to an audiobook or something like that, even, you can imagine the stuff that's happening however you want it. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like you can imagine it any way your mind's eye sees it.
Yeah, I think it's more powerful.
With a movie, they're kind of telling you how it looks.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Do you think it's that hard to imagine something like a scene?
I think we're in such a fast-paced world right now, and whether that's good or bad, I'm not saying, but we're in such a fast-paced life that people feel they don't have the time. Read? I can't do that. Give me the Cliff Notes.
Sometimes
give me
I
the
feel
movie.
that way with like reading books, but I feel the same way with watching videos. Like I actually prefer the audio medium because it allows me to drive or do other things while I'm listening.
Right, but I mean, you lose something because when you read, your brain like almost forcibly chews on it. Okay, In fact, actually, there's studies that say that even reading fiction novels makes you smarter for whatever that means, or your brain works better. We'll just put it that way.
It's definitely an intellectual stimulation, and it helps your mind grow.
Right, and when you read again, your mind almost instinctually, chews on what it read, and it takes time with it. As to where, with movies and all this other, all these other forms, they generally just like force feed the info on you. You take it and you move on, and I think you lose something in that. Because I think it's important to draw your own conclusions on everything. That's the point of being an individual, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Like, have you seen that meme going around on social media that says something like, if you go home with someone and they don't have any books, don't do it with them?
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't say that, but
yeah.
I'm trying to clean this up.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of disturbing trends in culture, Brian, I heard that there is going to be the first My Little Pony porn coming out.
Oh my.
Did you hear about this?
I did hear about this. Well,
that's how I felt when I heard
about it. Let's not be too harsh.
And also like that.
All right. I mean, first off, the Greeks would not find this strange at all. I mean, what they imagine with centaurs, or where even Zeus, I think, would take the form of a swan and get it on with a woman. I mean, all kinds of wild tales like that. So
that was pretty imaginative. This is what happens when you don't have actual porn movies or TV. You just get really insanely creative.
Yeah, I mean, well,
you put it on vases and frescoes.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's cases in frescoes, goats and all the. It gets pretty wild.
Yes.
But I mean, in this case, now granted, like I looked into this, they're not, they have like tails, that they kind of put on them and little ears. They are not, they're not doing this full business where like they're actually having, putting people in pony suits.
Okay. So they don't have like the lower half of a pony. This is not centaur porn. This is just, human female porn stars with little ears.
Right. And just kind of cutely acting like they're ponies and like they go into some kind of dream state or something.
Well, that's kind of cute.
Yeah, I don't see it as really myself. I don't see it as much crazier. It's not something I want to watch, but I don't see it as something any crazier than like Victoria's Secret's Angels.
Okay, and so is this like to appeal to the bronies?
Yeah,
we should explain what bronies are for people who don't know. These are oh God, what's a brony? It's a guy who likes My Little Pony, an adult man who likes My Little Pony.
The new My Little Pony show, which, this new show isn't, it's a clever show. It's not just made for children.
Do you think that they don't like it like bronies? They like it for non-sexual reasons. Is that right? Am I right about that? Or
I don't know if that's accurate.
Okay.
there might be there, and that's okay. Furry stuff. Hey, whatever, man. So there might be more to it, but yeah, this is definitely made to cater to them.
Oh, that's very interesting. So, all right, the first segment was full of bad, depressing news, and
Tasha's ponytails. It's not depressing.
Okay, we'll end off on a happier note, but there's more coming up. We are going to talk about something that's been on your mind, Brian. Doge. Stay tuned here on Sex and Science Hour. There's more coming up. EasyDNS is the Swiss Army knife for your domain names, helping meet their customers' individual needs since 1998. EasyDNS has been an outspoken critic of SOPA and CISPA. EasyDNS was an early supporter of Bitcoin, and now they are proud to sponsor this show. Do business with a company that shares your values. Get a 13% discount when you pay with Bitcoin. Go to bitcoin.easydns.com and be sure to use discount code LTB. Sex and Science Hour is part of the Let's Talk Bitcoin network, and we are so excited.
Wait a minute. What's Bitcoin?
What's Bitcoin?
What's Bitcoin?
Well, you'll have to listen to Let's Talk Bitcoin to find out. It's a twice-weekly podcast, and you can find it at letstalkbitcoin.com.
Okay, I gotta know.
Yeah, you really should probably get on that.
It has a whole network?
Yeah, we're part of it.
How did I not know about this?
You must have missed the memo that we were on their network. Anyway, now back to Sex and Science Hour. This is Sex and Science Hour. Hey, welcome back to the show. Yay. Brian, we've got to talk about Doge.
Why?
This is a specific thing.
Why?
So after the last time we recorded, episode 2 of Sex and Science Hour, which, by the way, if you're listening to this, go back and listen to Sex and Science Hour number 2, because I personally thought that was a very good show. Better than the first one, but the first one got a lot more plays because of sort of a technical thing about the way that it was posted. The second show that we made was not at the top of the Let's Talk Bitcoin podcast feed, because we are on the Let's Talk Bitcoin network. We love being a part of that. But the way it was posted, it was never at the top of the feed. So I think people maybe missed it or something like that.
Yeah, they might have missed it. Yeah.
So if you want to hear another good episode of Sex and Science Hour, definitely check out show number 2 if you're hearing this and digging it.
It's a conspiracy.
I think it must be.
Speaking of conspiracies, though.
Yes. Okay, so after we have recorded our second show, episode 2, how did this come up? I can't remember. We were talking about Doge for some reason, Dogecoin, which is, Bitcoin spinoff, cute dog.
What happened was, right, I saw a friend in New York on Facebook, and she said she became a Dogecoin millionaire. And I was like,
that's
what?
right.
I'm like, that's not even possible. Like,
She said multimillionaire.
Multimillionaire. Yeah. I'm like literally, that's not possible.
We looked at the market cap of Doge, and it was like 78 million. So she would have had to have owned like a few % of all the Doge out there.
Yeah, I think she would have to have been the creator or something. I mean, there's just she's not.
SaDOGei Nakamoto.
Yeah, SaDOGei. Wow, someone's going to use that. Yeah, and so then and she talked about the Jamaican bobsled team. Okay, and really like the whole Doge thing in general, I think is just it's a joke. Like I can't believe this is I can't believe this is serious. And it's funny. In fact, I know a lot of Bitcoin monogamists. Okay, and of course that's what I call people who think that Bitcoin is there can be only one.
Yes, they are married to Bitcoin.
Yeah, they
can be the only cryptocurrency.
Yeah, you cannot have any other altcoins. You just can't. And with Dogecoin, they accept Dogecoin. And I think the reason they do it is because it makes a mockery out of all the effort that every other development team puts into their altcoins. Okay. And I think that's really why they're into it. And it's insulting. But anyway. So
you're going to get some hate mail, Brian.
Well, that's fine. So the Jamaican bobsled team, there's this huge story going around. And I don't believe it. That this Jamaican bobsled team went to Sochi for the Olympics.
And they were funded by Dogecoin.
And they were funded $30,000 with Dogecoin.
It reeks of BS.
Oh, yeah, because, to say nothing of the fact that it's like Cool Runnings, the movie from the 90s.
Right.
Okay, that, was very popular. I enjoyed it when I was a kid. But I still really, other than the best evidence I've seen that they were even, competing, was they had an interview with Lester Holt. Okay, from MSNBC. He's kind of like their Tom Brokaw.
Were they actually on TV?
Yeah.
There were Jamaican people on TV claiming that they got funded by Doge to go to the Olympics.
Yep, with Lester Holt. And so that's the best
Where's
evidence
the video?
on YouTube, and the person was actually filming a TV screen, which I felt a lot better about, because I was like, if it's just going to be a full screen,
it could be
video,
staged.
yeah. But this was actually on a TV screen, and so I'm still having a hard time believing it. What I am willing to accept right now is that the Jamaican bobsled team, maybe there really was one that went to Sochi. I still have a hard time believing, though, that they got Dogecoin, and that somehow that they got $30,000 out of that. That's crazy.
Yeah, I think so too.
And if anything, they didn't get it out of Dogecoin. They didn't walk up to the Russians and say, "Oh, here, have some Doge." You know what I mean? They
So
probably
you don't
converted it into Bitcoin.
You don't think this is funny? I thought this was just an elaborate joke, and everybody who's in on it thinks it's really funny.
If it is, this is the most incredible internet hoax in history. In fact, if I find out it's a hoax,
maybe you're in on it right now, and you're just laughing to yourself.
Maybe, but if it's a fake, if it's a hoax, we might as well toss out the internet, because this is ridiculous.
Toss out the internet? That's getting a little extreme, Brian.
Toss it.
All right. Well, one thing we don't want to toss is our listener questions, because we have been getting some emails about Sex and Science Hour. Thanks to everybody who emailed us.
Yeah, it's great.
You can write in at show@sexandsciencehour.com. And we do have a placeholder domain up at sexandsciencehour.com. There's really nothing there. Eventually, we'll build it up and we'll put up a podcast feed, but we're not really ready to do that yet. So just stay tuned for that, and we thank you. But of course, our email address does work. And we got an email about private keys, Brian.
Okay.
Every time I hear that phrase, private keys, I kind of think of...
Tina Turner's Private Dancer?
Well, that too, yes. But I think of this, I used to work in a research lab in college. I studied biochemistry, and then I ended up getting my PhD in biochemistry. But I had this professor that I worked with when I was in college in a biochemistry research lab. And he used to say, your buffers are like your underwear. You don't share them with anyone. You keep them totally private. And okay, buffers are like, solutions of different materials that you use to do experiments. And, you want to make sure that you made your buffer. So if you screwed it up, it's no one's fault but yours. You don't trust anybody else to mix them up correctly.
Sure.
So I always think of that. Like, your private keys are like your underwear. You don't share them with anyone.
Well, it doesn't help when you don't wear underwear. But
yes, that's true.
Is how it is.
Well, there's nothing to not share then.
There you go. That's the best way to go.
So we got an email from listener Dane. He says, I'm wondering how it's possible to send your Bitcoins into the abyss by sending them to a wrong address or losing the electronic wallet. For instance, a downloadable app that gets accidentally erased. What happens if someone buys all the existing Bitcoins and then deletes their wallet? Now, that last part didn't exactly make sense, but it is possible to send Bitcoins to an address to which you can't move them out of. And the way you can do that is Bitcoin addresses are kind of like email addresses. If somebody has your Bitcoin address, that's the public part of it. It's the public key, right, in the key pair of the public and private key.
Right.
So if somebody has your Bitcoin address, they can send Bitcoins to you, but they cannot move the Bitcoins out of that address unless they have access to the private key. So the public address receives, the private key moves them out.
Right.
And sends or spends. That's the way you can think of it. So it's totally possible to have a Bitcoin address to which nobody has the private key, or perhaps somebody had it at one time in the past, but they encrypted it and then they forgot the password, or they lost the private key. They had written down the private key on a piece of paper and the piece of paper got damaged and now you can't read it. And sorry, it's lost forever, unless you keep some kind of a record or backup of it, it's gone. And so Bitcoins that are in that address cannot be moved out. So the Bitcoins still exist, but since Bitcoins kind of live on the internet, if you don't have the private key to the address that they're in, then you can't ever spend them. So they're effectively gone.
Yeah, it's pretty much game over at that point.
And of course, nobody can derive the nobody can derive the private keys from a Bitcoin address. Otherwise, Bitcoin would be broken.
Right.
Because then anybody could just spend your Bitcoins if they could crack the code. But nobody's been able to do that. So,
it's a pretty good bet that there's a lot of Bitcoins that are just gone forever.
I think there are.
Many thousands, I'm sure.
Yeah, there was a case where a guy had an old hard drive where he had like literally mined thousands of Bitcoins. He had like 7,000 Bitcoins on there, and he threw away the hard drive, and then later on he heard, oh, by the way, Bitcoins are worth $1,000 each. And he actually started a kind of a treasure hunt in a landfill to try to recover this hard drive.
Wow.
I don't think he ever did. I don't know if anyone ever found it. Of course, there have been hard drive failures and hard drive erasures where people were storing their private keys on. It's actually kind of inaccurate to say you have your Bitcoins on a hard drive or on a computer, because the Bitcoins are on the internet. It's just the key that you need to access the Bitcoins is on that hard drive. And if you lose it, then you can't ever access those Bitcoins.
Yeah, exactly. They're in the blockchain. So as long as the blockchain's somewhere, those Bitcoins aren't actually gone.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if you can't access them, you know,
They're
they
as
might
good
as
as
well
gone.
be gone. Yeah.
We also had another situation where a friend of ours, I guess his wife sent Bitcoins to an address that somehow the private key was lost or something like that. It was an old address that was archived somewhere, and they didn't know where the private keys were. They couldn't get the Bitcoins out. So that was another situation. Have you ever lost Bitcoins by sending them to an address that was bogus, Brian, or that you didn't have the key to, that you couldn't spend those Bitcoins in the future?
Years ago, I messed it up in sending. I don't know that they were lost, but you know, I'm not exactly sure where they ended up. This was really early on.
Oh, wow.
And so, yeah, but it was very few. I mean, like I made sure to send a very small amount just because I was testing everything at the time. Like,
well,
what would happen if I did this?
At the time, one Bitcoin might have been a small amount, but then time goes by and it's not so small.
That's a fact. And that's an important thing to think about any, denomination of Bitcoin is that, yeah, you think it's small potatoes now, but boy, if you can, do your testing on the test net. If you want to figure this stuff out, don't do it in the
Test it with Doge. Send a couple Doge to an address when you don't know the private key.
Yeah, mess with Doge, because Doge is just a copy of the Bitcoin protocol, essentially.
So, and as for the last part of his question, he said, what happens if someone buys all the existing Bitcoins and then deletes their wallet? Well, it would be pretty hard. I mean, that would be as hard as buying all the existing Bitcoins. First of all, you probably couldn't, because not everybody would sell you their Bitcoins, right? But if somebody were to buy even a large amount of Bitcoins and then somehow not be able to access that wallet, to lose the keys or something, then what would happen would just be that those Bitcoins wouldn't go anywhere, but they'd be inaccessible. So they'd be locked up forever, unable to be spent. And so just the existing Bitcoins that could be spent, that were in circulation, would become more valuable, because now there are fewer Bitcoins.
And Bitcoins are pretty much always infinitely divisible. Even though we only have so many decimal points that we're gauging, well, that can go on and on. Mm-hmm. That it doesn't have to stick to however many. There's 8 decimal points right now.
I think that can be changed too. Like if it turns out that, 1 Satoshi at some point, which is the smallest unit of Bitcoin, it ends up being worth $1, then they can just add more decimal points, as I understand it, in the Bitcoin code.
Right. And if you ran into a real problem where someone was doing something so malicious, I mean, I don't know that that's necessarily malicious, but, then you could just, you could do a hard fork, and make an altcoin. Well, I'm sorry. No, you can't do that, because...
You are opening up a can of worms. But you know what else is kind of like a hard fork?
What's that?
A hard 3D printed pelvis.
That's kind of like a fork.
Yeah, it's kind of like a fork. Not really, but
I'll accept that.
Had to do some kind of a segue here. Apparently, there's a guy who had an injury where he needed to repair a part of his pelvis. Actually, it was a rare form of cancer that was destroying his pelvis. So it must have been some kind of bone cancer or something like that, or multiple myeloma perhaps, which makes holes in your bones. And he received a 3D printed pelvis, or at least part of the pelvis. And 3 years later, it's still kicking.
Wow.
That's pretty good, huh?
3 years. Mm-hmm. See, now, 3 years ago, I think of 3D printing as still being very much in beta, not really having it all down.
Apparently they used titanium in order to print the parts of the bone that he needed.
Oh, then,
So that's
yeah.
pretty cool. I mean, if you could print a titanium bone, you'd be walking around like Wolverine, right?
Oh, sure. Right. Absolutely. I mean, that of course was adamantium, but titanium.
Oh, excuse me, Brian.
Well, I just didn't want an emailer to be like, actually, it was adamantium, But yeah, I mean, hell, I'd love to get my skull replaced with a titanium 3D printed one in that case.
Well, then people would be emailing you saying your head is even thicker than it used to be.
That's true. That's true. But it give the TSA a good time. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah, we actually have a story about that coming up. There's a friend of ours who says that the TSA saw Bitcoins in his bag.
Oh boy.
Yeah, that's pretty bad, huh?
Yeah. Well, actually, speaking of another thing, speaking of, law enforcement, I mean, having titanium bones and all this stuff would be fantastic to where, you could, because I mean, sometimes these encounters can be pretty brutal, and people walk away with.
Oh, like you get beat up by the cops,
Yeah,
but your skin would still get damaged and bruised. But I guess with 3D printing, perhaps it like I always say, it eliminates the need for skin grafting, like to take skin from one part of your body and put it on another. Like if you could just take some cells and kind of seed a scaffold and it would grow into skin, then you wouldn't need to do those painful grafting procedures.
Sure.
And actually, this is one thing we didn't say on our first episode, but I think personally, it should be possible to do 3D printed foreskin restoration now.
That's exciting.
And I think that would be really cool because if you could just 3D print one, replace what your parents took away from you because of silly religious traditions, that would be wonderful. That's the world I want to live in. This is Sex and Science Hour. There's more coming up. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to our new show. Yay!
Yeah, I mean, you already love it,
Hopefully.
But
if we're doing our job, they love it. And if you love it, it would be great if you could help us spread the word because it is a new show. So not too many people have heard the good word of Sex and Science Hour. Maybe you could go around and knock on some doors and say that you have some good news for people.
Yeah, you don't have to carry a book for this either, but maybe that would help in a white shirt and tie. And
yeah, look presentable. Maybe you could carry around a little tablet instead. And help people subscribe to our podcast feed.
Yeah, and just, have you heard about Sex and Science Hour?
That would be wonderful. So yeah, if you could just go ahead and do that. Sunday morning is the ideal time to be doing this, and we'd really appreciate it. Tell them to go to sexandsciencehour.com, and it's really for their eternal salvation. I mean, you're really doing people a favor by doing this. So.
Or you could just share it on social media.
Right, and we do appreciate it. Thank you so much. And now back to the show.
Yoo-hoo.
This is Sex and Science Hour. Here we come. We're coming back.
Yeah.
Hey. I'm Stephanie. You are Brian. Thanks for joining me today. We got another listener email that I wanted to talk about here on the show, Brian.
Oh, fantastic.
This one is about weed.
Oh, boy.
It's about cannabis, actually. That's
right.
how he refers to it.
Kind of a hot topic these days, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Or maybe when wasn't it? But in particular, it's in the mainstream news these days.
Yeah, this is actually from Ken from the Tokyo Bitcoin meetup. He's a co-organizer, and he says that
such a wonderful international audience we have.
We do, yeah, and we really
great.
Appreciate that. We don't want to get U.S. centric here by any means, even though we do live in New Hampshire, which is maybe the freest place in the U.S. That's not saying much, but anyway. So he says cannabis might be an interesting topic to cover. He says, as you know, it has been used for centuries in U.S. history for medicine, oil/food, textiles, etc., and it grows everywhere with practically little care. George Washington used to grow it in his own garden. Now, is that true?
As far as I know, that's true.
I mean, I know it's true that it has all these uses. I wasn't disputing that. But George Washington?
Yeah, I mean, there's some legends of George Washington that are true. There's some that aren't. Like
the cherry tree?
Well, like his wooden teeth. They weren't wooden. They were teeth taken, unfortunately, from
humans,
from slaves.
Yeah.
So there's some things that are true, some that aren't. But I think that's one of the ones where it's absolutely true because hemp has been a very popular plant, crop in the United States. In fact, even, around World War II, they were encouraging people to grow hemp, to grow cannabis, essentially. I mean, hemp's just...
Hemp is the male plant that doesn't flower, right?
Yeah,
and the buds are what people smoke. So essentially, they're smoking flower
right.
buds. that have the THC and that gets you high, right? But getting high is one of very few things, is a small part of what this plant does.
Exactly. And, again, during World War II, there was videos sent out to farmers by the U.S. government saying, please grow this. It's so funny how far we've come. I mean, now it seems like we're going full circle to where it's getting legalized in a lot of states in the United States.
In some places, yeah, but I haven't really seen like hemp and industrial uses be focused on. A lot of them are focusing on, medicinal and recreational uses for marijuana, which personally I have no interest in. Like, I don't smoke pot, and
yeah, I don't either.
I'm just not interested in it. It's not my thing. However, I recognize that it probably does really help some people who have certain medical conditions where they need pain relief. It seems pretty, there's evidence that it is an analgesic and it helps people with pain. And also, I don't want people to be put in jail for it. Just because I don't do something for fun doesn't mean I want to jail people who do. And the drug war, of course, is one of the biggest excuses to have basically a industrialized system of racism where, I don't know how it is in Japan, but here it's young Black and Hispanic males that get put in jail for possessing flowers. It's ridiculous.
No, it's an incredibly unfairly, unjustly vilified plant that there is pretty much no scientific basis at all behind it. Behind it being illicit, behind it being illegal.
And if you're not a drug user, that's fine. But like, if you're paying for the drug war, this is also one of the most egregious excuses to violate people's civil liberties.
Oh, sure.
Searches and all manner of things, even financial restrictions are perpetrated in the name of the war on drugs, the so-called war on drugs.
Yeah.
And we've had it for decades, and it hasn't stopped anybody from using drugs. Pretty much everybody I know has tried marijuana. It's not stopping anybody from smoking weed,
No, right. I mean,
but it is stopping people from getting medical medicine that they might need, and it is stopping people from getting textiles and food and all the other uses of this plant. Right.
And one thing you can look for if you want proof, that society will not suddenly fall into decay, that all the people who have been imprisoned or, put in jail over marijuana, or cannabis or hemp, whatever. Colorado just said that they're going to let everybody go. That's in jail for...
Oh, they're going to pardon all the drug offenders. Wow.
Yeah, as my understanding goes.
Well, that'll probably save a lot of money. I hope they pass that on to the people who are, unfortunately forced to pay taxes for it. Right?
Well, yeah, and it's going to be an interesting experiment, and I don't want to use the word experiment to somehow belittle the situation. Mm-hmm. I'm just saying that let's take a look and see if Colorado's crime rate just suddenly skyrockets out of nowhere. Or maybe what's going to happen is that their budget might start balancing out because they're not putting victimless, not putting people in jail for victimless crimes.
I bet these private prisons or whatever don't like that because they get paid. They get money from the state based on the number of people that are in there. They want to fill those rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, they're a money-making business just like JCPenney.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be what it's all about. Back in the 1930s, wasn't, cannabis legal in the U.S. until there were like big companies like DuPont, I think, was a chemical company, and they made paper, and they didn't want hemp-based products to be able to compete with them, so they kind of lobbied to get it. And then there was the reefer madness propaganda that pot makes people crazy, and it makes these black men want to have sex with white women. Oh no, the world society's crumbling, moral decline. I mean, it was just the biggest load of crap, and I don't know why people bought it. Why did they let that happen? I'm not exactly sure. I wasn't alive back then, but suffice it to say, we're still dealing with the consequences of that now. So, good topic. We're up on our Dr. Bronner's hemp soapbox talking about this, which is probably the one hemp product that I actually use. But speaking of things that have been oppressed and crushed by the government for decades and centuries, Native Americans.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, it's not funny because, I mean, people who were here for a very long time, had their land taken from them, were totally oppressed and sort of hooked on these government programs that keep them down and keep them in poverty, had their land stolen from them, were told what to do, just at turn after turn were killed and impoverished and hurt by the U.S. government and by just white people in general.
Sure.
Right?
I mean, their lands were invaded.
But usually politically connected. White people.
Yeah. I mean, essentially a bunch of illegal aliens from Europe came into Native American land.
I love that. Yeah.
In 1492 or whenever. And wait a minute. The legal aliens came in. Boy, that. It's funny because, you hear so many people, especially in the United States, complaining about, we've got an immigrant problem. We can't let these Mexicans in.
Yeah. What a bunch of crap.
That's nonsense. It's like, well, then you know what? I think the Iroquois shouldn't have let those European ships land either while you're at it. If you're going to play that game. Yeah, but interestingly, I mean, these are people that really have been oppressed and continually oppressed. The laws are still pretty much against them, and it looks like I've recently heard they're trying to get a modicum of freedom. What's that about?
At least some of them are, yeah. So, I mean, the history of Native American kind of re-liberation is really interesting. There was a Russell Means, and he was a very famous activist who was actually an actor. He was like a movie star, but he was very active in trying to get Native American sovereignty and rights. And he was part of the Lakota Nation, as I understand. And they seceded from the U.S. about 1 billion times. I don't think the U.S. ever recognized it, but every few years they would come out with a statement saying, we're seceding from the U.S. And everybody would just be like, oh, that's funny, isn't that cute? But I mean, hey, like they should be able to secede from the U.S., be left alone, not be subject to the laws. They were here first. Give them a break,
Yeah,
seriously.
Really, I mean, anyone should be able to.
Anyone should be. I support secession down to the individual level, absolutely. Yeah. But now there's another guy who's kind of has picked up Russell Means's torch, really, because he passed away last year or a couple of years ago, and that is Payu Harris. And he is actually very interested in Bitcoin. He's like a Bitcoin activist, and he's a proponent of bringing cryptocurrencies to Native American nations. Or he actually calls them native people, which I would agree with, because America is kind of a term that's invented by Europeans, right?
Right.
So, he calls them native people, and sure, I'll call them that too. But yeah, apparently the Lakota Nation, which already has some experience with sort of like banking freedom, is making their own crypto coin. It's kind of an altcoin, and it is a SHA-256 coin like Bitcoin.
So it's pretty much based off of, by and large.
It's a fork of ZetaCoin, which I don't know too much about ZetaCoin, but ZetaCoin's another altcoin.
Right.
And they have a client that you can download. So I think what they're trying to do is say, hey, let's stop using these Federal Reserve notes if they use them. I mean, what else would they use, right?
Right.
But like, let's use this to buy things from each other instead of using the money of the government that has oppressed us for centuries. And that makes so much sense, doesn't it?
I agree.
And it's so much easier than carrying silver rounds around and stuff. They can be physically stolen and ganked and so forth. And yeah, I just think it's a cool idea.
Yeah, I like this. Something I look for in an altcoin usually is maybe features or an infrastructure. This doesn't exactly have either, other than it is, maybe it has the infrastructure of the native peoples, that want to use it. And I think that's fantastic, because I think this skirts a lot of those laws saying you can't mint money, only the U.S. government can do that within its boundaries and all this business. And it just makes it so simple for them to really, make an independent claim on their own currency. And
yeah, it's like, I really like the attitude of not asking for permission, because that's exactly what they're doing. They're just saying, we're going to take back our financial freedom, and we're not going to ask permission, because when we do, the answer is no, right?
Right.
Yeah. Hey, government, would you mind if we just kind of, made our own altcoin and start using that? No, of course not. They're not going to be happy about that. So anyway, it's called Mazacoin, and they've got mazacoin.org, so you can read about it there. The only thing that I found kind of strange was I was reading about the features, and it said it's the most environmentally friendly cryptocurrency because it encourages recycling of all those old ASIC miners for Bitcoin. that would otherwise be
Yes.
filling up landfills. And I don't know about that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the whole thing. They take a lot of electricity to run and so forth. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a clever pitch, I suppose, but yeah, no, I mean, that's if you want to go green, use something like Next, like NXT or whatever, but
Which doesn't have mining, right?
Which-
It's
proof of
totally
stake.
proof of stake. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I still don't know what I think of proof of stake. Maybe we'll have to have a discussion about that on one of our next shows. I mean,
Sure.
I'm not like totally opposed to it. I just would like to see it in action a little longer, let's just say.
Oh, sure.
And there is always the problem of if you have a proof of stake coin, how do you get the coins out there? Like you have to have some way to distribute the coins if there's no mining. And so what people usually do is fundraisers, kind of like an IPO thing where they sell the coins, or maybe they distribute them among the founders and then the value changes and they sell them later. Yeah, and then sometimes they raffle them off in some way, but
this goes, I mean, I don't know if we want to go down this road, but this becomes, what Next does is it does what's called transparent forging. And that essentially means that a lot of people get this confused. They think that means that all the coins are pre-mined. And it's not, they're not pre-mined. That's a misconception.
Okay.
It's that they're already all in existence. It's just, you can, through proof of stake, you get access to them through this transparent forging. So, and that's a real short and sweet version of it. But I think a lot of people are very, very confused by the idea that they're
I'm
pre-mined.
confused.
Well, another episode we'll have to talk about it. I
Okay,
definitely am not up to the 10-minute discussion for that.
Okay. Yeah, because we do only have a couple minutes left. And speaking of not asking for permission for things, Brian, you found an article about not apologizing for having loud sex. Is that right?
Yeah, it's an editorial out of New York Magazine. And I thought it was...
We had to play.
I thought it was pretty good because, the whole point, oh yeah, boy, is it good. Wow.
I tried to stop it and it just started again.
That's
anyway.
fantastic. Anyway, it was something that I think not a lot of people want to talk about. It's like NASA. It's like, oh, do people have sex in space? Oh, we don't want to talk about it. And especially in a place like New York City.
Yeah, they're embarrassed.
Yeah. I mean, you have people, you're right on top of each other. You're so close. It's practically impossible to have any privacy. Certainly when you're making the, kind of the guttural, like deep noises that, that come with the cries of passion.
Well, is that a reason to like live out in the woods, perhaps?
Yeah, maybe. But at the same time, it's like, one of the cases that this article makes is that, look, this is what people do. They have sex.
Yeah, and it said something that I thought was interesting, which was like, look, the point of being an adult and having a home that you live in is so that you can do whatever you want in your home.
Right.
And that includes having sex. And
Yeah.
loud sex is one type of sex, and it's just normal. Get over it.
Yeah, and it includes
If you're
apartments.
so embarrassed by that, if you're the neighbor and you're so embarrassed and so appalled by it, maybe you need to adjust your expectations, right?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, and
If you're going to hear the neighbor mowing their lawn,
Sure.
you may hear them having sex once in a while.
yeah, and it should be treated little different, in my opinion. Of course, in New York City, you probably wouldn't hear people mowing their lawn, but the point's the same no matter where you are,
Okay,
really.
true, yeah.
But in any case, and it ends off with a really great point saying, what if the person who, the people having sex don't know they're that loud? Maybe they'd be embarrassed. Maybe you should say
Well,
something.
aren't they going to be embarrassed if you tell them?
Well, that's the point, is that, no, don't say anything.
I think that person
know?
wants them to be embarrassed.
Yeah, I mean, right. You're probably trying to do some, innocuous shaming
Right.
of some kind. And, in like a really unprompted sexual discussion, especially in a world that can't handle sexual noises, that's going to come off as creepy. So it's an article I thought that had some great advice to it. But it brought up a point for me that I think is really, really interesting. Speaking of like different styles of living, and it briefly discusses some of that in that, in the United States, and here we are talking about how we didn't want the show to be US centric, but in the United States, people used to live in single room log cabins forever, all the time, 12-person families, and now as crazy as all that sounds, what did mom and dad go off to the woods?
Yeah, they were having kids somehow, right?
Like, I mean, where did those 10 kids come from? How did they get there?
Babies were coming from somewhere.
Right. And no, in the middle of winter, they were not running off to the woods. There's no outhouse. It's a single person, it's a single room. Wow. Yeah. I bet some of them might have done that, but it was a single person, single room house, not person, single room house. Okay. And so probably the parents, maybe they were picking better times at night to be doing it, but the kids were in the same room. I hate to, believe me, I get it. I hate to admit to that, but I'm just saying that's probably how it went down. Sex used to be, I think, it wasn't so vilified as it is today. I don't know exactly where that came from.
Yeah.
But it used to be pretty commonplace. In the Middle Ages, where did people have sex? In church. Nobody knows that.
Seriously?
Yeah, why? Because there was no privacy anywhere else, and it was the cleanest building in the town.
Wow.
That's where people had sex. I mean, there's tons of documentation on this fact. Okay, so when the church bells rang, you probably heard a good moaning and groaning going on at the same time. Right on. So yeah, I mean, the thing is that people used to be over this, and I don't know what happened, but this article gives some great advice.
They've been reprudified.
Yeah, reprudified.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because, you hear these things about how the Puritans weren't actually that prudish, right? Because they did have those arrangements where it was like they lived in the same house as a lot of other people, and everybody understood that, couples were going to have time alone and they're going to have sex. And
yeah, by law, actually, by Puritan law, they had to have sex.
Yes, they had to.
You're not vilifying sex. You're saying, no, you got to do it.
But was that just because they wanted to make babies to work on the farm?
Well, certainly it was. But at the same time, what kept a Puritan couple from each other? They would put a piece of wood in the middle of the bed, okay? And that wood, it looked like kind of like a vertical shelf that would separate the two.
Not the kind of piece of wood you're thinking.
No.
Yeah.
It was about 6 inches tall, but it wasn't the kind of wood you're thinking. And, who's that going to stop? It didn't stop anybody.
No, it was just kind of a pretense that they were separated.
Right.
But they would really jump over the piece of wood.
Exactly. If they really wanted to stop it, they would have made it 6 feet tall.
Or just slept in a different room. Yeah.
Something.
Yeah. So they weren't that puritanical. And I don't know. I just thought that was kind of interesting. Maybe we're getting back to our evolutionary roots. I read the book Sex at Dawn, and they said in there they had a discussion of why do people make noises during sex, especially women when they have orgasms. And they were saying that, it's to attract other people. It's to let other people know what's going on.
Well, is it to attract or to make them stay away?
Well, they're not exactly scary sounds. I mean...
No, they're very pleasing.
Yeah, I don't think really humans make noises to warn people to go away, really. They would just probably hide if they wanted to not be seen. But
I'm of the opinion the noises were made to lure in or to welcome
right.
people.
Yeah, perhaps.
So
there's a lot of wild stuff in that book.
Oh, it's very, very controversial, but very revolutionary book.
It's a heretical book about anthropology because they go through and analyze all the parts of the human body and say, this is why people are meant to have wild sex with all different partners. And
yeah, I mean, every generation seems to have this book, Kinsey's books, 70 or however many years ago.
Yeah.
And then you had Masters and Johnson, with their books so many years ago. Then Dr. Ruth in the 80s. Every generation, or at least every, decade maybe, has their seminal book that really brings sex maybe not forward, but back to maybe what it already was, what we already knew. And Sex at Dawn is definitely, I think, that next step, that next level bit of thinking, in my opinion.
Anyway, we're going to go answer the call of the wild. This has been Sex and Science Hour. Thanks for tuning in. You've just heard Sex and Science Hour.
You can connect with us at sexandsciencehour.com.
Game over. Play again next week.